So playing behind me right now is some footage of me testing my RTX 3080 12GB at 4K with DLSS balanced with maximum settings including ray tracing. Now why does that matter? Well, we have an interesting leak, although the source of this leak is not one that has a long track record of accurate leaks, so I don't want to make too big of a deal out of this, but it's apparently a claim on the performance that an RTX 4090 Ti, or something that's the full AD102 die, whatever they end up calling that, and its performance that it gets in the game control using ray tracing and DLSS. However, it doesn't tell us what DLSS settings and such they're getting. But I did want to benchmark this game and show, okay, well, I have the RTX 3080 12GB, and it's getting in the mid 60 FPS range with DLSS balanced in combat with maximum settings. So that at least gives us some kind of a comparison for this claim. Now, again, this claim is about the full AD102 GPU, but the source of this is not a track record, kind of like, right, there's the leakers on Twitter who have got things right in the past about previous GPU leaks, and then there's random tweets that you don't know what to make of. And I would put this in that second category, random tweet that I don't know what to make of. This is from AGF on Twitter saying, got the first in-game score. Doesn't say how they got this first in-game score. But let me get myself out of the way here a little bit. There we go. Lost my button. I got the first in-game score, full AD 102 at high power draw. Whatever does it mean? Maybe OC. So they're saying maybe overclocked, or they're testing out different power draw configurations for the AD102 GPU and saying full AD102. Now that's significant because the leak we got earlier this week was for the 4090, not the 4090 Ti, and we would expect the 4090 to not be the full AD102 GPU, so this would be the 4090 Ti, or maybe you would call it a Titan if they choose to go with that branding. We'll see what they do. And it's saying this is in the game control, ultra 4K with ray tracing plus DLSS. Again, they're not saying how aggressive the DLSS was. So in my testing on my 3080, I showed you I went with the medium setting, balanced. And they're saying it reaches 160 plus FPS. Now, reaches doesn't mean average, it doesn't mean minimums, and it doesn't tell us what scene of the game they're testing. Notice that I was choosing to test a demanding combat scene when I did this, whereas it's possible that they could just be staring at a wall if this is even true in the first place. They say they don't know which CPU, RAM, GPU clock, but it looks very high to me. What does a 3092 in this do in this bench? Now, Hassan from, I believe he's a WCCF Tech author for a lot of their tech news stuff, is replying with some scores from a RTX 3090 using 4K high settings, RT reflections, RT shadows, DLSS quality, and getting around 72 FPS average. But again, we don't know if this is the same scene in the game. And again, he's saying high settings with DLSS quality, whereas this said ultra settings and didn't say what the DLSS setting was. So we can't make too much out of this. All I can say, though, is 160 plus FPS, even using DLSS, when using 4K ultra settings with ray tracing in control, is demanding. Like I showed you here, my 3080 12GB in combat is just hanging out in the mid to upper 60s. Well, as in less demanding scenes at those settings, I can be up into the 80s or 90s. But let's move on to some other topics. How about the Intel Arc A770 flagship GPU demoed on Linus Tech Tips? Now, honestly, this didn't give us a ton of info. You got a few glances at a few frame rate numbers, but we didn't have the exact settings they were running the games at, so this doesn't mean that much. The interesting part of this is I like that, first of all, they were acknowledging that games that are running on older APIs don't run well, right? They run much slower, but this was the cool thing. It says the takeaway here is that Intel promises to kill everyone in price to performance in Tier 1 games because their pricing will reflect their Tier 3 performance. So basically, they're going to take the games that don't perform well because the drivers haven't been updated well, and benchmark that as their performance tier when they set their pricing tiers, which is extremely interesting. If they actually do that, to where basically your price is based on your worst case scenario, and games that are like new games running on DX12 and that have been optimized actually run extremely well, that's a really interesting tactic. If Intel actually does this, my opinion of their Arc GPUs might be that they're not totally pointless, although I have a feeling that you're still going to basically be a beta tester and have a lot of problems. But anyway, I've really enjoyed Intel's kind of marketing campaign they've done recently on a lot of big YouTube channels, where they seem to be completely acknowledging that this is a work in progress, the drivers need updates, and they don't seem to be hiding any of that. So I at least like that they're taking that tactic. And if they price them extremely aggressively, these could still possibly have a home for somebody who is willing to take on the little extra challenges involved in running basically a beta. Now, in other Intel news, we're seeing a possible price increase on their CPUs. Now, apparently this is to resolve overstock issues at a factory level. Now, you might be like, how would increasing the price help out the fact that they're overstocked in their factories? Wouldn't raising the price mean that they're not going to sell as many and they'll be even more overstocked? Well, what they're talking about here, when I read through this article, is threatening to charge more for their CPUs towards the end of the year to the retail outlets that purchase them and then sell to the consumer. And the idea being to threaten a price increase later in the year could spur the retail outlets to purchase a larger supply right now at the lower price. And the idea there would be to get the stock out of their factories and to retailers. So this is interesting. We'll see if it plays out. This is apparently originally coming from DigiTimes, and I'm seeing it here at WCCF Tech. So it could mean more expensive CPUs later this year, but we'll be getting the next gen of CPUs later this year. So we'll see what that means anyway. I wonder if this is just Intel trying to get this current generation out right now before the new ones come out further down the line. Speaking of which, in my last news video, I reported on some 13900K engineering sample or qualification sample early testing that's taken place. Well, we're now seeing leaked benchmark scores show up on Geekbench for a 13600K as well as a 13700K, which means that we now have leaked single-core and multi-core performance numbers in Geekbench for the full 13600K, 700K, and 900K lineup from Raptor Lake, which is pretty interesting. Now, if we go ahead and look at these results, Video Cards has them in a nice little table here. And so you can kind of see them up against each other. Now, keep in mind that these are engineering samples. We also don't know whether some of these are overclocked scores that we're seeing. So don't read too much into this. We certainly need to wait for full reviews and all of that. But based on these early numbers that we're seeing here, we are seeing that these chips will all be taking, at least especially if you base on multi-core results, taking the performance crown even over like a 5950X. The 13600K, due to all of its extra efficiency cores and its faster single core performance in its, on each of its main performance cores, is actually almost able to catch up to a 5950X, whereas the 13700K manages to actually have a slightly higher score here than the 5950X from AMD, and these are also beating their previous generation counterparts from Intel. And their single thread performance is now having a pretty significant advantage over the 5000 series from AMD. So we definitely need to see AMD take some big performance jumps with this next generation if they're going to be competing, at least in single core performance, with the 13th gen from Intel. Although the multi-thread here is also, again, taking a big jump here from Intel. So this is really interesting. Seeing what happens, but again, we've got to wait for full reviews before we get the full picture. We'll see what happens, and again, pricing could really be everything So we'll see how all that goes. Now, in some quick little bits of news we've got here, somebody actually, so a while back, some manufacturers started taking laptop GPUs and putting them on desktop GPU PCBs and actually turning them into desktop cards. But these had limited driver support due to the fact that they're not really supposed to be doing this. And so these were primarily targeted for mining. Well, it looks like we did get Bull's Lab doing an actual review on one of these, which is kind of interesting to see how it performs. Now, what's interesting about the performance here is just seeing what happens when you take a laptop GPU and compare it to its like desktop GPU counterpart. Because the laptop RTX 3060 actually has more CUDA cores than the desktop version, but it only has 6 gigabytes of memory instead of the 12 gigabytes that we see on the desktop version, as well as the mobile variant only being able to go up to 115 watts, whereas the desktop version can go up to 170 watts. And we actually saw, in some cases, the mobile version actually managing to beat the full desktop version, or at least get close in certain cases, despite having such lower power draw. And then, see it compared to the laptop 105 watt version, anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, but you're not going to buy one of these, so I should stop dwelling on it. I just thought it was an interesting test. Now, GeForce NOW is rolling out 120 FPS cloud streaming to Android devices, although it looks like iOS devices will still be waiting until later on. So if your Android device has a 120 hertz display, that could be good news for you if you're into the cloud gaming, cloud streaming and such. We're also seeing Alienware unleashing the first and fastest AMD Advantage Laptop with a 480 hertz refresh rate. Guys, do you really need this? I get the high-end like esports crowd. 480 seems a little much to me. Honestly, guys, if you can't get the kill at 240 hertz, is 480 hertz really going to make the difference? Maybe it is. Either way, there you go. You've got a laptop with a 480 hertz refresh rate, going up to a RX 6850M XT and a Ryzen 6000 HX CPU. Now, we've seen Stray release with some very good reviews and player counts given its kind of indie game nature. I think that's due to the fact that cats win when you're on the internet. And I was considering talking about system requirements or benchmarking this, but when I glanced at the system requirements, they look incredibly reasonable. The recommended system just has a GTX 783 gigabyte or an AMD R9 290X with, it's fairly old mid-range CPUs. So this doesn't look like anything crazy, 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I don't know, I might get it and test it out on like my 1060 and see how it does, but I'm not sure this would be worth the video or not. Let me know in the comments section if you're interested in seeing Stray benchmarks if I have time. I'm going to be pretty busy this coming up week, so we'll see. Anyway, I hope all of you have an excellent day.